A 20-year-old's insane human bait trick. 52 Germans dead, his unit saved. Hurricane Forest, Germany. November 18th, 1944. The temperature stayed low all morning, and the fog never lifted from the tree line. The 121st Infantry Regiment had been ordered to clear a narrow sector on the western edge of the forest, a zone that intelligence claimed held only light German resistance. The goal was simple on paper: push forward, secure the approach route, link up with an engineering team that needed to cut a corridor for future vehicle movement. For the men on the ground, the mission felt like countless others in this forest: slow, exhausting, and filled with uncertainty. Private Elias Turner, 20 years old, moved through the formation with his rifle held tight to his chest. He came from a small rural town in Pennsylvania where he spent most of his youth hunting in thick woods. Those experiences helped him blend naturally into this terrain. He could read slopes, judge noise, and sense when something felt off. He was quiet, reliable, and rarely asked questions. His training had been straightforward infantry, but his calm response under stress made him a dependable member of the platoon. Sergeant David Whitman, 31, walked several steps ahead. He was a pre-war mechanic from Ohio who had served long enough to recognize danger before it appeared on a map. He had fought in Normandy and the hedgerows and carried those lessons into every new mission. His task today was to keep the platoon moving, maintain formation integrity, and ensure that no gaps formed that the enemy could exploit. He respected Turner's instincts and often relied on him during reconnaissance. Lieutenant Carter, 26, led the platoon with measured caution. He joined the Army through an accelerated officer program and had learned quickly that most plans changed the moment the first shot was fired. His objective was to move his unit carefully down the assigned ravine and reach the rendezvous point before nightfall. He studied the terrain constantly, aware that the Hurtgen Forest punished even the smallest mistake. The platoon advanced into a shallow ravine bordered by steep slopes on both sides. Turner immediately felt uneasy. The visibility was extremely limited. Dense branches blocked most sight lines, and the narrow ground offered almost no lateral cover. The men continued forward because the map indicated this was the only passable route in the area. If they avoided it, they would have to reroute several kilometers through unstable terrain. The sound of boots grinding on wet soil and gear brushing against branches mixed with quiet breathing. No one spoke loudly. The forest had a reputation, and every man in the platoon treated the silence as a warning. Turner scanned the tree line constantly, noting broken branches and disturbed leaves, small signs that suggested recent movement. He didn't like the angle of the ridges or the way the ravine curved sharply ahead. He slowed slightly, trying to catch the lieutenant's attention, but it was too late. The first burst of MG 42 fire struck the point squad without warning. The weapon's rapid rate of fire tore through the formation in seconds. Turner dove to the left, his shoulder slamming into the cold ground as soil and bark exploded around him. The machine gun nest was positioned high on the right slope, concealed by a cluster of dark pines. Before the men could react, a second MG-42 opened up from the opposite side, creating a deadly crossfire that locked the platoon in place. Sergeant Whitman yelled for the men to get low and stay behind whatever cover they could find. Lieutenant Carter attempted to signal a withdrawal, but the angle of the fire made movement impossible. Every attempt to lift ahead or shift position drew fresh bursts from above. Within the first minute, several men were down, and the medics struggled to reach them. Turner pressed himself into a small pocket of mud behind a fallen trunk. He listened carefully, noting the rhythm of the German fire. The nests were coordinated and well prepared. They had walked directly into a trap. He spotted flashes from both sides, confirming at least 2 machine guns supported by rifles and possibly a sniper on the upper ridge. The German positions controlled the entire ravine. The radio operator tried transmitting back to company headquarters, but the ravine walls and heavy forest canopy blocked the signal. The lieutenant checked their map again, but Turner saw the frustration in his eyes. They had no artillery support, no armor, and no air support in this sector. What they did have was a steadily shrinking supply of ammunition and a growing number of wounded. For the next hour, every attempt to find a route out failed. Two fire teams tried pushing up the left slope using smoke grenades for cover. The Germans waited until the men were halfway up, then opened fire again. No one made it past the midpoint. The sergeant regrouped whoever could still move, but morale began to slip as the situation became clearer. They were surrounded. German infantry were closing in from behind the ravine while the machine guns pinned the forward line. If night came, the enemy would attempt to finish them with grenades and close-quarters attacks. The lieutenant knew it. Whitman knew it. Turner watched both men exchange looks that said everything without a word. He studied the terrain again, focusing on a narrow funnel he had passed the previous day. It led down toward an old logging ditch that provided partial natural cover. He remembered reinforcing that ditch with branches simply because he thought it might be useful. Now, for the first time since the ambush began, a possible solution formed in his mind. The lieutenant slid beside him, breathing heavily. "We're running out of time," he whispered. Turner kept his eyes fixed on the funnel. "Sir, I can pull them out," he said. "If they think they can finish one of us, they'll chase. They'll leave those nests. If they move downhill toward me, the platoon can push through the west gap." The lieutenant stared at him. "You want to act as bait?" Turner nodded. "They'll come after me. They always go after someone who looks isolated. If they commit to it, the fire from above will drop long enough for you to break out." Whitman overheard and shook his head. "This will get you killed." Turner answered quietly. "If we stay here, we're all dead." The lieutenant looked at Turner for a long moment. He knew the boy's calm wasn't bravado. Turner didn't volunteer to impress anyone. He volunteered because he had calculated the odds and believed this was the only actionable plan left. The lieutenant finally whispered, 10 minutes. When we hear your signal, we move." Turner nodded once. No more discussion was needed. He checked his ammunition, tightened the grenades on his belt, secured his helmet strap, and prepared to step into an area where no one else dared move. The platoon watched him without saying anything. Exhaustion and fear lined every face. They understood the risk he was taking. Turner didn't look back at them. He focused on the slope ahead, waited for a slight lull in the fire, and prepared to stand. The forest was silent for a brief moment, just long enough for him to take a breath and step out of cover. He moved into the open alone, fully visible, ready to draw an entire German force toward him so the men behind him had a chance to survive. Turner stepped out from behind the fallen log and moved deliberately into the shallow clearing, keeping his rifle angled down so the enemy would believe he was exposed and disoriented. The moment he appeared, the first German machine gun spotted the movement. A short burst cut across the dirt in front of him, sending fragments of soil into the air. Turner sprinted to the side, staying low, letting the Germans see exactly what he wanted them to see, an isolated American trapped in open ground. Inside the ravine, the platoon held their breath. The lieutenant watched through a narrow opening between roots as Turner ran, and he understood that the plan was now fully underway. His responsibility was simple. Once Turner created a distraction large enough to break the German firing pattern, he would move the platoon west through the only gap left in the encirclement. Sergeant Whitman prepared the men closest to him, checking that every soldier understood the direction and pace of the withdrawal. They all waited for Turner's signal. Turner moved across uneven terrain he had memorized from the previous day. He advanced toward the narrow slope that led to the logging funnel, keeping himself visible long enough to draw the Germans' attention. When one rifle shot snapped past his left ear, he turned briefly, giving the enemy the impression that their fire was pushing him off balance. A second machine gun opened up from the right slope. Its sustained burst stitched a line across a fallen trunk as Turner ducked behind it. He fired a single shot toward the tree line, not to hit anyone, but to insult and provoke the enemy, making them believe he was trying to hold his ground alone. The German response was immediate. Several voices began shouting orders in rapid German. Turner heard movement higher on the slope, branches snapping, equipment clattering, boots striking against rocks. This was what he needed. enemy infantry leaving their entrenched positions to engage him directly. Turner exposed himself again, running across a gap with deliberate clumsiness so the Germans would think he was panicking. Another burst tracked behind him, close enough for the heat of a bullet to brush past his jacket sleeve. Turner descended the slope toward the funnel. He knew exactly where the choke point narrowed. He had reinforced the logging ditch with branches the day before because he believed the terrain could be a defensive asset. Now its usefulness became critical. He slid down the incline on his side, allowing gravity to carry him faster while he kept control of his rifle with both hands. The Germans shouted louder, their boots accelerating downhill as they closed in. Behind Turner, the German squad leaders misread the situation. They assumed Turner was attempting to break through their encirclement alone, which made him appear desperate and vulnerable. This triggered the reaction Turner prepared for: aggressive pursuit. German infantry doctrine often pushed squads to close distances rapidly when an enemy appeared isolated, especially when terrain favored momentum. Turner was counting on that habit. As he reached the bottom of the funnel, Turner ducked behind a stump and reloaded. He did not rush. He used the seconds carefully, checking the alignment of his sights, placing his grenades at the ready, and ensuring his elbows had support against the stiff ground. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from exertion and a knowledge that timing mattered more than anything else. Up the slope, the first German soldiers became visible, gray uniforms pushing between trees, their rifles raised. They were confident and loud, shouting to one another as they descended. Turner saw at least 8 men in the first wave, followed by a second group emerging further behind. There were more than he expected, possibly entire sections converging on the same path. This was dangerous, but it also meant the platoon would have a better chance to escape. Turner stepped out briefly from behind the stump and fired 2 quick shots. Both rounds struck the dirt near the lead German soldier. Turner didn't wait to see the reaction. He retreated deeper into the funnel, letting the enemy believe he was attempting to flee. The Germans increased their pace. Turner could hear the commander shouting, driving them forward. Inside the ravine, Lieutenant Carter watched the change in enemy fire patterns. The machine guns began to slow, their bursts widening as crews tried to locate Turner's new position. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Carter raised his hand to signal Whitman. The sergeant nodded and began quietly organizing the withdrawal teams. The men positioned themselves for rapid movement, weapons ready not for an attack, but for covering fire if needed. They waited for Turner's signal, the grenades. Down in the funnel, Turner reached the narrowest point. The ditch he had reinforced lay a few steps ahead, hidden beneath a low ridge of branches. He dropped into it, flattening his body against the packed earth. From here, he had a stable firing position and a clear shot at the only approach from above. Turner removed the first grenade from his belt and held it loosely, waiting until the Germans crowded close enough to make the blast effective. The moment arrived quickly. The first German soldier appeared at the top of the funnel, scanning for Turner. He shouted a command to his squad. Several more soldiers pushed forward behind him, unaware of how exposed they were. Turner pulled the pin smoothly and lobbed the grenade upward, landing it near a cluster of advancing troops. He immediately reached for the second grenade, threw it slightly higher to disrupt the rear line, then pressed himself tight against the ditch floor. 2 explosions shook the funnel. Dirt and wood fragments rained into the ditch. German voices erupted in confusion and pain. Several soldiers stumbled, disoriented by the concussions. Turner raised his rifle and prepared to begin the second phase of the plan: precise, controlled fire to collapse the enemy pursuit entirely. Inside the ravine, the men heard the twin blasts echo through the trees. Whitman shouted, "That's it. Move. Move now." Turner's plan had worked. The platoon surged into motion as Turner prepared to open fire from his hidden position, drawing the enemy deeper into his trap. Turner lifted his head just enough to see over the edge of the ditch. Smoke and dust hung in the air from the 2 grenade blasts, turning the upper part of the funnel into a blurred silhouette of movement. Several German soldiers were on the ground, either wounded or stunned. Others were trying to reorganize, shouting to determine where the attack had come from. Turner steadied his rifle on a firm section of packed earth and prepared to fire with disciplined precision. The first German soldier to regain awareness attempted to stand, using his rifle for support. Turner fired a single round that struck the soldier squarely and dropped him immediately. Before the nearby troops could react, Turner shifted slightly, using the minimal recoil to reposition smoothly for a second shot. Another German collapsed backward into the slope. The narrow funnel forced all of their movement into a predictable path, which allowed Turner to fire with maximum efficiency. The German squad leader shouted orders to spread out, but the terrain gave them no options. The funnel walls rose sharply on both sides, covered by dense roots and stone. The squad had to descend straight toward Turner's position or retreat uphill, and most chose to push forward, assuming they were being attacked by more than one American. In the confined space, their numbers worked against them. They bunched together, blocking their own lines of fire and making it difficult for anyone to move past the fallen. Turner fired again, shifting his aim by inches each time. He did not rush his shots. He used short, controlled breathing, just as he had practiced while hunting. He checked each target clearly before squeezing the trigger. Every round counted. His magazine emptied quickly, but not wastefully. He ejected it, letting it fall beside him, and inserted a fresh one while keeping his head low. He listened carefully to the slope, identifying footsteps sliding on loose soil, equipment clattering, and soldiers adjusting their positions. One German soldier attempted to flank left by climbing slightly up the slope to gain a higher angle. Turner saw the movement. The man's helmet rose above the branch line for a fraction of a second. Turner fired immediately, dropping the flanker before he could reach any stable ground. The body tumbled down, causing two others to lose their footing as they tried to avoid it. Turner used the moment and delivered another precise shot into the center of the mass, disrupting their formation again. More Germans appeared at the top of the funnel. These soldiers were from the rear pursuit group, drawn forward by the grenade explosions. They assumed the frontline troops were engaging a large American squad, not a single private hidden in a reinforced ditch. Their aggressive momentum pushed them straight into the worst possible position. Turner realized he now faced at least two full squads closing in. Inside the ravine, the platoon moved through the West Gap exactly as Turner intended. Lieutenant Carter led the first group, guiding them over the uneven ground while maintaining low silhouettes. Sergeant Whitman stayed near the rear, pushing the slower men forward and helping two of the wounded move with assistance. The absence of coordinated machine gun fire confirmed that Turner had successfully diverted the German attention. Every second counted. The men advanced quickly but cautiously, checking each corner of the dense brush for new threats. Back in the funnel, Turner heard more boots thundering down the upper slope. He knew he had only moments before the enemy realized the scale of the deception. He fired again, hitting a German rifleman who tried to leap over a fallen comrade. Another soldier dropped beside him, attempting to return fire. Turner saw the barrel lift and shot before the German could settle his aim. The return fire struck the ridge inches from Turner's head, sending dirt down onto his helmet. Turner reloaded again. He reached for his final grenade, but stopped. The grenade's loud blast would reveal his exact location if thrown prematurely. The Germans were still in motion, still disorganized. He needed to maintain that confusion for as long as possible. The German sergeant regained composure and shouted commands to split into two prongs, one pushing low and one attempting to climb the right incline. Turner saw the maneuver forming and adjusted. When the first soldier stepped into a narrow opening on the right side, Turner placed a round directly into him. Another soldier tried to replace him but hesitated when he saw the body fall. Turner shot him as well. The right side approach collapsed instantly, and the formation became compressed again. The Germans now returned fire in multiple directions, guessing at Turner's position. Bullets tore into the ditch's upper branches, shredding bark, throwing splinters across Turner's arms and face. He kept his body pressed tightly against the earth, moving only when he had a clear shot. He fired 2 rounds rapidly, hitting a soldier who tried to slide down the slope on his stomach to reduce exposure. The man slid uncontrollably into others, causing another wave of confusion. Turner felt the situation tightening. The Germans were recovering from the initial shock. They were beginning to understand that the fire came from a single point. Their officers shouted new commands, organizing a more coordinated push. Turner realized he had seconds before a full assault on his ditch would begin. He removed the grenade from his belt, held it in his palm, and waited. He listened carefully to the boots approaching. The squad leader shouted again, ordering the men to close in. Their steps grew louder, more synchronized. Turner counted silently, waiting for the moment when the greatest number of soldiers packed into the narrow entry point. Then he pulled the pin. He released the grenade with an underhand throw, letting it roll down a natural groove in the soil to settle among the approaching Germans. Several of them noticed and tried to react, but the confined terrain prevented any meaningful movement. Turner dropped flat and covered the back of his head with both hands. The explosion tore through the slope, sending debris and bodies in multiple directions. The concussion shook Turner's entire ditch. Screams and choking sounds followed. The smoke thickened, clouding the air. Turner forced himself upright again, rifle ready, prepared to continue firing the moment any surviving Germans attempted to reorganize. Up in the trees beyond the ravine, Lieutenant Carter and the platoon were already moving farther west, using the window Turner created. The success of the entire escape now depended on Turner holding his position long enough to prevent any German counteraction. Turner steadied his breathing, peered through the smoke, and waited for the next wave he knew would come. Turner pushed himself higher against the dirt wall, lifting the rifle into position as the smoke began to thin. The funnel above him was filled with bodies, broken equipment, and scattered helmets. Several German soldiers were still moving, some trying to crawl out of the blast zone, others attempting to drag their wounded back up the slope. Their disorganization was critical, but Turner knew it would not last long. The Germans were experienced enough to recover quickly, especially with fresh troops arriving from the ridgeline. A pair of Germans attempted to reposition behind a boulder halfway up the slope. Turner shifted slightly to the right, exhaled steadily, and fired 2 rounds in quick succession. Both soldiers collapsed behind a rock. Turner immediately returned to his original position, knowing that exposing himself for even a second too long could allow a surviving rifleman to lock onto him. The terrain continued to work in Turner's favor. The funnel forced the Germans into a single narrow avenue of approach, and every soldier who attempted to descend that slope emerged into a predictable line of sight. However, the enemy had now committed more than one section to this pursuit. Turner saw at least a dozen fresh soldiers pushing downward, stepping around the bodies and debris with increasing determination. Their officers shouted over the chaos, attempting to restore discipline and establish a coordinated advance. Turner checked his ammunition. He had 2 full magazines remaining and a partial one. He could not waste a single round. He fired again, hitting a soldier who attempted to raise a machine pistol for suppressive fire. Another turned to throw a grenade downhill, but Turner struck him before he could complete the motion. The grenade rolled harmlessly back toward the upper slope and detonated away from Turner's ditch. For a brief moment, the Germans hesitated. They began to understand they were facing one hidden rifleman controlling the entire choke point. One of the officers signaled for a flanking attempt from the right side, directing 2 soldiers to climb the slope cautiously and approach the ditch from an elevated angle. Turner anticipated the maneuver immediately. He knew the right side incline provided only 2 workable footholds before it became too steep to ascend quickly. He waited, watching for movement. A helmet appeared first, barely visible among the branches. Turner fired once, hitting the soldier before he could gain a stable firing position. The second soldier froze, unsure whether to proceed or retreat. Turner fired again, ending the attempt. The officer shouted new orders in frustration. The Germans adopted a new tactic. Several soldiers began laying suppressive fire into the ditch. Rounds tore into branches above Turner's head, splintering wood and throwing dirt across his helmet. He stayed prone, protecting his face with his arm while maintaining awareness of the slope. He knew the suppressive fire was designed to force him to remain down while assault troops closed in. Turner listened carefully. Amid the gunfire, he detected the distinct sound of boots sliding on loose soil, another attempt to rush him. He rose just enough to see 3 soldiers advancing quickly down the center of the funnel. They were moving in a staggered formation, trying to overwhelm him with numbers. Turner waited until they were within effective range before firing 3 rapid shots. All 3 soldiers went down, breaking the momentum of the charge. The hillside became chaotic again. German soldiers yelled conflicting commands as they tried to pull casualties uphill while still maintaining pressure on Turner's position. The confined space made it impossible for them to maneuver efficiently. Turner exploited every moment of confusion. He fired at a rifleman who attempted to kneel behind a fallen log. He shot another who tried to crawl forward with a hand grenade. He did not rush. Every action was deliberate and controlled. Meanwhile, deep in the forest to the west, Lieutenant Carter's platoon continued its withdrawal. The men moved in a staggered formation, pausing every few meters to check for German patrols. Sergeant Whitman kept the pace steady, urging the exhausted soldiers to remain alert. 2 wounded men were carried between riflemen, supported under each arm. The forest was uneven and filled with debris, but they made consistent progress. The farther they traveled, the clearer it became that Turner's diversion had completely disrupted the enemy command structure. Back at the funnel, Turner's position began to shake again. A new wave of German infantry emerged at the ridgeline, pushing downhill in a tighter formation. These soldiers moved with more discipline than the earlier groups. They fired controlled bursts as they advanced, indicating that a senior non-commissioned officer had taken charge. Turner recognized the shift immediately. These men would not rush blindly. They would try to pin him with fire while another team approached from his flank. Turner flattened himself to the ground as several bursts raked the top of the ditch. He felt dirt scatter across his neck and helmet. He did not panic. He waited for the firing pattern to shift. When the Germans paused to reload, Turner rose, fired 2 shots into the advancing formation, and dropped back down before the next burst arrived. His timing was precise, just enough to slow the advance without exposing himself too long. One German soldier managed to get close, sliding down on his stomach in an attempt to flank Turner's firing angle. Turner noticed the movement, rotated his body, and fired a single round that struck the soldier before he could raise his weapon. The body slid down the slope until it stopped against a fallen branch. Turner reloaded again, inserting his last full magazine. He knew his ammunition was nearly gone. He also knew the platoon needed more time. If the Germans broke through now, they could pursue the fleeing Americans and reinstate the original encirclement. Turner had no intention of allowing that to happen. A German officer shouted for smoke grenades. Turner saw 2 soldiers preparing to throw them downhill. Turner fired quickly, hitting one, then the other before they could release their grenades. The smoke canisters rolled harmlessly into the brush and emitted only a small cloud far from his position. Turner checked the slope again. Several German soldiers were retreating uphill, dragging wounded comrades. Others appeared shaken, unsure how to approach the ditch without incurring more losses. The attack had slowed again. The hillside fell into a brief moment of stillness except for the groaning of wounded men and the distant echo of German instructions. Turner took advantage of the pause. He shifted slightly inside the ditch, adjusting his angle to see more of the upper funnel. His breathing was steady. His heartbeat was fast but controlled. He remained focused on the single task he had given himself: hold this position for as long as it took to ensure that every man from his platoon escaped alive. He listened carefully for the next sign of movement. The forest around him was heavy with tension. He held his rifle firmly, ready to respond the moment the Germans attempted another push. The battle was not over, but Turner had already changed its outcome. The forest around Turner fell quiet for several seconds, broken only by the shifting of wounded Germans on the slope and the distant thump of artillery far outside this sector. Turner remained still, his back pressed firmly against the dirt wall of the ditch. He adjusted his grip on the rifle and listened. The Germans were not retreating, they were reorganizing. He could hear short, clipped orders from somewhere higher on the ridge. Those orders carried a tone he recognized, an officer reasserting control after heavy losses. Turner checked his ammunition again. Only a partial magazine remained. He removed it, examined the rounds, and slid it back into place. He needed to slow the Germans just a little longer. If the platoon had reached their planned fallback point, they would be moving deeper into the western forest where cover was thicker and German pursuit was less likely. Turner had no way of knowing their progress, but the sounds he hadn't heard, German machine guns firing toward the west, suggested the diversion was still working. Above him, several German soldiers moved back into view. They kept their profiles low this time, crawling rather than running. They had learned from the earlier assaults. Turner watched them through the thin gaps in the branches. He noted their spacing, their angles, the way they coordinated their movement. These were more disciplined troops, grenadiers brought forward to stabilize the line and eliminate resistance systematically. One soldier carried a rifle grenade launcher. Another held a smoke grenade. Turner knew exactly what that meant. They intended to mask the slope with smoke, flank him, and overwhelm the ditch. Turner waited until the soldier with the smoke grenade raised his arm. He rose half an inch, fired once, and dropped the target before the grenade could be thrown effectively. The device rolled down the slope, releasing a small cloud too distant to obscure Turner's position. The Germans responded instantly with return fire, filling the air with debris and splintered bark. Turner stayed low, using the earth of the ditch as his only shield. A second soldier moved into position with a rifle grenade launcher. Turner knew he could not allow the man to fire. A grenade exploding inside or above the ditch would kill him instantly. Turner slid his rifle along the dirt, angled it toward the upper right, and waited for the smallest possible opening. When the German leaned forward to adjust the launcher's angle, Turner fired a single shot that struck him squarely. The man fell onto his side, and the launcher tumbled down the slope before detonating harmlessly among the rocks. The Germans grew louder in their frustration. Turner heard a command ordering 2 fire teams to press down both sides of the funnel simultaneously. This would compress him from 2 angles, leaving him no room to adjust his position. Turner had anticipated this possibility since the beginning. He shifted slightly deeper into the ditch, using a reinforced fold of earth he had built the previous day. That position gave him a narrower field of fire, but greater protection from flanking angles. The left side fire team descended first. Turner saw the top of a helmet appear above a cluster of brush. He waited, knowing that the soldier would need to step clear of the vegetation to fire accurately. When the moment came, Turner shot with no hesitation. The helmet dropped out of sight. The second soldier froze, hesitating for a split second too long. Turner fired again, ending the left side push. The right side fire team advanced more carefully. They stayed close to the ground, moving over the bodies of earlier casualties, inching forward toward the ditch. Turner controlled his breathing and waited. When one soldier raised his rifle over a log to test Turner's reaction, Turner ignored it. He did not fire until he saw the man's full upper body shift into the open. Then he fired twice, striking him before he could find a stable firing angle. Despite their losses, more Germans continued to descend. Turner counted at least 8 still attempting to push forward. He could not stop them all with the rounds he had left. He recognized this reality without emotion. His task had never been to survive indefinitely. His task was to delay. And every second he held this position was another second that his platoon moved farther out of danger. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Carter and the platoon pushed deeper into the forest. The ground became more uneven the farther they moved from the ravine. Thick roots crisscrossed the forest floor, slowing their pace. 2 riflemen carried a wounded soldier by his arms while another limped with support from medic. Whitman constantly scanned the rear, listening for German pursuit. So far, He heard nothing but distant echoes. Turner's continued fight holding the enemy in place. Carter paused briefly to check his map under the dim light that penetrated the canopy. They were nearing the designated rally point, a sheltered depression surrounded by fallen timber. Once there, they could regroup, redistribute ammunition, and coordinate with adjacent units. The lieutenant glanced back toward the ravine, then made a silent decision to keep pushing. He knew Turner was buying this window of escape with every round he fired. Back in the funnel, the Germans launched another coordinated push. Four soldiers advanced together, firing as they moved. Their rounds struck the ditch walls, sending bursts of dirt into Turner's face. Turner wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve, raised his rifle, and fired at the lead soldier. The man went down instantly. Turner shifted his aim to the next approaching figure and fired again. The remaining two soldiers attempted to retreat up the slope, but their movement exposed them further. Turner shot one before he reached cover. The last disappeared into the trees. Turner checked his magazine. Only a few rounds remained. He steadied himself, preparing for what he knew would be the final advance. The Germans above him regrouped, their voices low but firm. Turner listened to the cadence of their movement. More boots, more weapons being reloaded, an officer giving strict commands. He raised his rifle and aimed toward the upper funnel. He could no longer allow them to descend freely. He fired at movement near the ridgeline, striking one soldier before he could join the main formation. He fired a second round at a shadow crossing between two trees, then a third, hitting another figure attempting to gain a vantage point. His rifle clicked empty. Turner ejected the magazine and reached for the final partial one. His fingers trembled from exhaustion and the cold. He inserted it, locked it into place, and chambered the next round. The forest around him seemed to tighten. The Germans, aware that he had slowed his rate of fire, prepared for their decisive push. Turner steadied his breathing once more. He knew the platoon had reached the rally point by now. He lifted his rifle, ready to continue the fight. He would hold as long as ammunition allowed. Turner held his rifle at the ready and waited for the next German push. The sounds on the slope shifted from scattered, individual movement to a coordinated advance. He heard boots repositioning, bolts sliding forward, and the distinct clatter of weapons being checked. The Germans had reorganized under a senior NCO or officer, and they were preparing to clear the ditch with a full assault. Turner understood the implications. With only a partial magazine left, he would not be able to stop them indefinitely. But he also knew that every second he remained alive was another second the platoon gained distance into the forest. The first German emerged cautiously, keeping his rifle raised. Turner fired one round, hitting him in the chest. Another soldier took his place almost immediately and ducked behind a tree trunk. Turner aimed at the exposed arm and fired again. The man recoiled and dropped his weapon. A third soldier attempted to rush forward on a low sprint, but Turner hit him before he reached cover. Each shot cost Turner in time, breath, and ammunition. He estimated 4 or 5 rounds remained. The Germans paused their push for a moment, then shifted tactics. They concentrated heavy suppressive fire at the ditch to pin Turner down, while a separate group attempted to approach from the flank. Bullets struck the upper ridge repeatedly, showering him with soil and splinters. Turner lowered his profile and pressed his helmet to the dirt. He could hear several soldiers sliding down the slope to his right. Their boots scraped against roots as they tried to exploit the dead angle of his firing position. Turner rolled to adjust his aim, rotating his body inside the narrow ditch. He waited until the movement on the right grew close enough for him to identify shapes clearly. When a lead soldier leaned forward with a rifle, Turner shot him. The second soldier froze, then attempted to retreat up the incline. Turner fired again, hitting him in the back as he climbed. The third soldier dropped flat and tried to reach for a grenade. Turner shot before the man could pull the pin. Turner lowered his head again and breathed hard. His arms felt heavy from recoil and tension. His right shoulder ached from repeated impacts with a rifle stock. Mud covered his uniform and streaked across his face. He had been in the ditch far longer than any soldier would expect to survive under these conditions, and the cumulative strain showed in the tremor of his hands. But he pushed those thoughts aside. The fight was not over. At the ridgeline above, the Germans reorganized again. Turner heard multiple voices shouting orders. A mortar team was being called in. The enemy finally understood that a single American had held their advance and inflicted serious losses. They intended to end it quickly. Turner recognized the danger immediately. A single mortar round landing anywhere near the ditch would kill him instantly. He raised his rifle and fired 2 rounds uphill, targeting the silhouette of a soldier carrying a long cylindrical tube. The man fell backward onto another soldier. Turner fired again, hitting a soldier who attempted to pick up the dropped equipment. His rifle clicked empty. Turner ejected the magazine. It felt almost weightless. He checked it anyway. 1 round remained. He inserted it, locked it into place, and chambered the final bullet. He knew exactly what it meant. Whatever he faced next, he had a single shot left to use. He listened carefully. The Germans were preparing another push, likely their final one. Boots pressed into the soil. Weapons were readied. An officer shouted for a coordinated descent. Turner raised his rifle and positioned himself as steadily as possible. His breathing slowed. He waited for the exact moment when the enemy soldiers would appear clearly in his line of sight. Before he could fire, a sudden burst of American small arms fire echoed faintly from the west. Turner recognized the distance. It was too far to indicate immediate danger to the platoon. It likely meant they had encountered a patrol or fired warning shots to clear their path. Turner relaxed slightly at the realization. The platoon had made it far enough that they were no longer in immediate pursuit range. That knowledge gave him one final measure of clarity. 4 German soldiers appeared at the top of the funnel. They advanced cautiously, rifles ready. Turner selected the soldier furthest left, the one who moved with the most confidence, likely a squad leader. He steadied his rifle, breathed out, and fired his last round. The shot hit the soldier in the upper chest. The man fell backward into the others, creating a temporary obstruction. Turner lowered the rifle. It was empty. He had no more ammunition. The Germans hesitated briefly, unsure how many Americans remained in the ditch. Turner took advantage of the pause to crawl deeper into the narrowest section, pressing his body beneath a thick layer of branches and soil. His goal now was simple: survive long enough for the Germans to waste time clearing the funnel, giving the platoon even more distance. The Germans began to descend again. Turner heard them approaching cautiously, stepping over bodies and debris. Their boots cracked branches, shifted loose rocks, and slid against the soil. A team moved to the right, another to the left. They were preparing to encircle the ditch. Turner stayed silent. He barely breathed. He let the forest swallow the sound of his presence. The Germans reached the edge of the ditch and fired several rounds into the interior, expecting to hit any survivors. Turner remained pressed against the ground, motionless. The shots tore into the earth walls but did not reach him. Satisfied that the ditch was clear, the Germans raised their weapons and scanned the lower slope. They expected more Americans. They did not find any. Confusion spread among them. Their officer scanned the ground, trying to understand how one small position had inflicted so many losses. Turner waited until their voices grew faint, until he was certain they were moving down the slope and away from his hiding spot. Only then did he slowly shift his weight and begin crawling out of the ditch, inch by inch, using the noise of the German movement to conceal his own. He kept low, sliding along the ground until he reached a cluster of brush that shielded him from the funnel. He paused there, listening. The Germans had pushed too far forward, believing they needed to catch an American withdrawal force. They had no idea the platoon had already escaped the area entirely. Turner rose to his knees slowly. His legs trembled from exhaustion. His hands shook from adrenaline and cold. But he was alive. He secured his empty rifle across his back and began moving west, following the faint trail left by the platoon. He traveled cautiously, stopping frequently to listen, making sure no patrols were closing in. Step by step, he pushed through the dense forest, navigating by memory and instinct. After nearly an hour of steady movement, he heard distant American voices. Turner followed the sound until the trees opened into a shallow depression surrounded by fallen logs. The platoon was there, exhausted, muddy, bruised, and silent as they tended to their wounded and regrouped. Sergeant Whitman noticed Turner first. He stood abruptly, staring in disbelief. Lieutenant Carter turned and froze, unable to speak. Turner stepped forward, weak but steady. Whitman grabbed his shoulder and held him upright. "You made it," Whitman said quietly. Turner nodded once. "Did everyone get out?" Carter answered, his voice unsteady from relief. "All of them. Every single man." Turner lowered himself onto a fallen tree and exhaled for the first time since the ambush began. No cheers followed. No celebration. Just quiet acknowledgement among soldiers who understood exactly why they were alive. Later, when Carter wrote the report, he described Turner's actions only in functional terms: delaying the enemy, breaking the encirclement, enabling safe withdrawal. Turner never added details. He never spoke about the number of enemy soldiers in the funnel or how close he had come to dying dozens of times. He simply returned to his duties when ordered, as if the day had been no different than any other. The forest remained silent around them, holding the evidence of what had happened in its soil, on its slopes, and in the torn branches scattered across the ground. Turner sat with the platoon, bruised, exhausted, and alive. He had completed the task he set for himself. He had saved his brothers in arms. And in the vast landscape of the war, his actions, like those of so many young soldiers, would remain known only to the men who witnessed them, carried quietly in memory long after the forest itself had forgotten.